He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Bocchcchio is back with us. And for anyone who didn't listen to the first time he was on, we'll make sure that's in the show notes so people can go find it. But Ben has been working his magic on Jack and taking him through some of his workouts. So we certainly want to talk about that, as well as maybe get to some of the exciting stuff that Ben has been working on. I was at a conference, fortunate to be at a conference in person with Ben not too long ago as well, which is always fun. So we'll get to all of that. I guess, Ben, maybe just a brief intro for anyone that didn't hear our first episode, and just kind of who you are and what you focus on.
Okay, I have been in this field. Started off, I have a couple of degrees, a couple of PhDs, one in exercise physiology, another one in health. And in 1974, I brought slow resistance training, a system of slow resistance training, high intensity, to the public, and have been using it ever since. And just a couple of notes to people. I am an exercise physiologist by trade, but I would like people to understand a little bit that to be an exercise physiologist, first you have to be a physiologist. And then when we apply the steroids, the exercise put under stress during exercise, the physiology putting under stress, then we can have a real appreciation of the power of exercise, the power of the muscle system. And again, having done this for 50 years, I have seen this thing iterate into now where there's a real appreciation of the muscle system as an endocrine signal sending system. And I've been speaking about that for many years, but the power of exercise in the brain, the power of exercise in fat metabolism, the power of exercise and longevity. And it's now, I think, becoming more and more accepted, but I've been preaching the same story for a long time. And it's kind of nice that now, there's some positive feedback, and where in the beginning it was like, it's this musclehead talking about, and I would give a scientific explanation. They go, wow, I can't believe that guy knows this stuff. And now it's being accepted. So it's kind of been a nice career going over 50 years now, and maybe we'll keep it up for a few more,
Yeah, you've been doing this longer than just about anyone, certainly I know of. And you've certainly learned a few things along the way, as you mentioned, and more importantly, taught a lot of people along the way. What would you say are maybe the top couple of myths that persist around training and maybe just around health in general from your perspective?
Another aside about me, I was one of the first low carb people starting in the 1970s, early 70s. I was a low carb advocate, only initially for the purpose of getting people lean, to be honest with you. I've mentioned this to Jack in our discussions. A lot of the stuff that has developed as a result of people partaking of my training system have really come about, weren't my initial goals. I wanted to get people lean and strong, and I worked with a lot of athletes, but it seemed to morph rather rapidly into a very benign health adjunct with many more benefits, even though I knew about them, but I didn't realize the power myself of what I was doing in the system and the way I was functionally, programming this thing to work. So I got very lucky. I wasn't, it's not like I'm a genius and I figured this stuff out the first day, but very rapidly I got to see how the application of this system really addressed many of the major, degenerative health issues. The metabolic syndrome really was, I was treating metabolic syndrome without knowing I was treating metabolic syndrome, just because I was trying to change body composition and some functional with some functional advances. So it's been, so when you ask me about some of the myths are, that a lot of exercise is necessary to derive the benefits. That's, in fact, not only is that not true, it's actually damaging, because a lot of exercise is almost an oxymoron. Because how I described physical activity, I separated it into two distinct disciplines. One is exercise and one is activity. And I separate them because exercise is mandatory for optimal health, no question about it. It is demanding at whatever the subjective level is for the client, the patient, the person, the subject of a study. And it's organized, okay? It's really a structured stimulation of certain muscle fibers in certain ways. In other words, there's a designation, there's an organization of frequency, duration, intensity, even style of exercise that allows us to get the highest level of return by taxing the muscle system this way. And when we tax the muscle system in this particular way, we also have to be cognizant, and we have to give some credence to the recovery process and to the physiology that we are inducing. And I think that is what should define exercise, and especially high intensity exercise. And the other discipline I speak about with a slash is activity, which in my opinion is the muscle movement that is designed to offset sedentary behavior. And that's a little more optional. It's not quite as organized, but it's something that should be undertaken pretty much on a daily basis. But it doesn't have to be so formal and so structured, but it's just, again, not being sedentary, because as I have ascertained in some studies with Arizona State University, being sedentary is damaging. It's a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and for metabolic syndrome and things that really devastate our national and now modern health. So I make those two distinctions. So that the idea, and even some exercise people, because supposedly exercise people promote, is that just do anything. I agree that doing anything is better than doing nothing, but that's a pretty low bar. I mean, it's so low that, some of the things they prescribe, I think a cadaver could do. So in my opinion, that's maybe, but yeah, you should not be sedentary. You should not sit on your butt 8 hours a day and then go home and sit on the couch for another 4 or 5 hours. This is not how the human physiology evolved. Okay, we have certain demands. We need, oxygen. We need certain nutrients, and we need certain physical activity. There's no question that for optimal health, we can't get around it. And one of the other things that gets under my skin a little bit is you can't outrun a bad diet. First of all, nobody's asking you to run at all if you don't want to, okay? Secondly, of course, it's like saying, the sky is blue. If you eat crap constantly, for a long period of time, there's nothing that's going to, not even a drug, not even a GLP, okay? It is going to really reverse the damage that you can do by that. But it gives the connotation that exercise is not a real tool. You have to get your diet organized. And I don't totally disagree with getting your diet organized, but I have presented in the last 3 years how exercise singularly produces fat oxidation rates, which means fat burning, but in and of itself, regardless of diet. Of course, I agree that if we do not damage our metabolism with a diet that we consider, quote, bad, meaning harmful, it's energy that we can't healthily store, okay, then we start to get fat cell dysfunction and things like that. But the fact that people will swear, and some of our colleagues, Phil, that are smart guys, and my friends, and I like them and I respect their intelligence, really think that exercise is not a good way to lose weight. And if we're talking about losing fat, they're dead wrong, okay? Dead wrong. And I presented 12 metabolic pathways that high intensity exercise stimulates to enhance fat burning, to reduce fat storage, to increase metabolic rate, to increase insulin sensitivity. A lot of the things that we propose are results of a good, maybe a low carb or a low energy or some kind of, however we're going to describe a good diet, the same pathways that are instigated by that behavior are instigated sometimes in spades by exercise of a certain intensity, and yet they're almost ignored. And to me, it's foolish. I mean, to me, I do have this superiority complex. I do admit it. But the fact that I've been doing this for so many years so successfully just makes me scoff at the fact that these people don't accept this. And I don't understand why, but that's life,
I can say this in response. I've been working out. Ben's been coaching me, Phil, for about a month now. And his workout is, it's hard to describe how surprising it is. I think when I first started learning the routine, it took me, about 25 minutes, Ben?
Yeah.
And we're getting down to about 15 minutes twice a week. If you'd have told me that I could get the kinds of results in 30 minutes a week that I'm seeing my body respond with, I would have laughed. Now, I've been exercising various ways on and off my whole life. My youngest son got me into powerlifting, so I did powerlifting for a while. And I played basketball like a fiend until I was 40. I've done a lot of exercise, but I've never done anything like what what Ben's taught me in terms of intensity. And it makes sense given what I've learned on the show about metabolic health, about how this kind of work is a high intensity fat burner as well as a high intensity muscle builder. I'm astonished. It blows my mind. And, I've talked to Ben, we've interviewed Ben, he's explained it, and I thought I got it, and then I did it. And it's ridiculously simple.
Yeah, but
I'm baffled. I'm blown away.
It's very nuanced, and the interpretation or the observation of the physiology is undeniable. It's unequivocal. Okay, and Phil, you with your incredible knowledge of the cardiovascular system can appreciate some of the things that I say. When people think this is a high intensity HIIT training and all this, okay, yeah, whatever. But the fact that the muscles can demand that these support systems be working at their highest capacity and can increase their capacity and their resilience with regard to health and resisting pathogens and viruses and, health, which is really a resilience, a youthful vigor against intrusion. The fact that the muscle system can produce, for example, when we talk about VO2 max, okay, between muscle strength and VO2 max, you've got 80% of the most critical, highly expensive anti-aging program you could possibly imagine. And people pay thousands of dollars for anti-aging programs. But by doing this thing and eating a controlled calorie, really, in my opinion, a controlled carb diet, we'll get 80% of the most glorious, expensive Hollywood, whoever you want to, anti-aging program. And my next book, not to promote it, but that I'm writing right now, is about longevity and strength. It's called Get Strong, Live Long, and Die Laughing. Okay? Because what I'm trying to get across is that this is so important. So get strong. It doesn't take a lot of time. It takes the most benign, minuscule amount. I mean, if you can't give me 15 minutes twice a week, then, check your insurance policies and God bless America. But I mean, it really is that productive. And I laugh condescendingly at my colleagues who just don't buy that until they actually do it, or they have people and clients and patients to come to them saying, what the heck are you even doing? I've been doing this program twice a week for 15 minutes. And I say, listen, I'm an old guy. I'm closer to 80 than 70, okay? And I said, honest to God, I've been doing this for over 50 years. That's all I do as far as formal exercise. Now I'm active. I ride a bike. I play golf. I played tennis for years. I walk. Okay, but my formal exercise is that, and mine's not even 15. Mine takes about 14 minutes. But the point is, if we understand how to manipulate the muscle system, and if we understand the support systems, the cardiovascular, the cardiorespiratory, the endocrine system, the skeletal system, obviously, I mean, this all makes sense. I mean, if I can list, all of these benefits, all of these pathways that if we look at physiology are known, and I can test them and there's research that shows that, legitimate research and studies that show that this happens, then why not take advantage of this kind of potent, short, small pills to take in regard to metabolic health. And also, I always thought that metabolic health, Phil, you and I, and everybody in the low carb movement and things like that, wouldn't be in business for that business anyway, if it weren't for the weight loss carrot. Okay. So that's what gets people to, I want to be less fat. Now there's some more people, I don't want to have osteoporosis. A lot of people, and that obviously that's a factor and an attribute of this kind of a program. I don't want to be old. I want to have resilience. I want to be able to see my grandchildren. I mean, so the longevity thing comes into play. I got it. But this is all the same. It's the same prescription. Just like, Phil, we have, you and I and some of our colleagues, that are at a high level in this field, we have pretty much the same prescription for a number of different problems. That's what metabolic syndrome is about. This means that we have some deficit that manifests itself in maybe different ways, but it's one root cause, right? It's the inability to handle energy in a healthy manner. So this exercise that I promote and the eating that I've been a low carb person since the early 70s. I mean, before I even understood all of it, I just knew it was a good way to get people lean. Okay. And then I studied it, and I continue to study it, and I love to study it and figure out why this works. And it does, for strength, muscle strength, for functional capacity to move and do our daily tasks, for VO2 max respiratory system, for cardiovascular health and vigor. Okay, it's hard to beat this combination. And again, it's not such an ominous, behaviorally obligatory method of living. I mean, that's the nice part. It's so behaviorally palatable that I sometimes just can't understand why people don't do it. But again, this is where we're at, and I'm trying not to preach. But I mean, to me, if you want to help people, this is something you should really consider pretty heavily.
I'd love to. I remember when we had Phil, been on the first time, Phil, and I had all these questions. So I'm betting that people listening have similar questions I had that didn't get answered. My questions back then were, okay, I love the theory. I love all the medical stuff. I dig all the science stuff, but can we just get down to brass tacks about what the heck it is you do? And now I can talk about that. So with your permission, Phil, I'd like to describe the exercise in terms of what I'm actually doing. And then you guys talk about what's happening under the skin. So I've got a barbell with a bunch of weights, and I've got exercise bands. And Ben pointed me to the right bands. I had some old bands that broke the first day we worked out, bought some new ones. I do 7 exercises. I do 1 set of the following exercises. I do low back bar squats, and then I do deadlifts. And then I do flies with the bands. Rows with the bands, flies with the bands. And then I do biceps, triceps, shoulder arm raises.
Shoulder laterals, yep.
And then that's the 7. And then, 8. And then I do some crunches. And I have yet to do 10 reps on any of these exercises during a workout. Not even 10 reps. I'm not talking sets. I'm talking reps. And it just, old me would have said, I'm not really getting any work. But Ben's method here is, for example, because I'm early in the process, I know I'm getting muscle gains pretty quickly, but my squat has gone from barely able to get the bar up to I've started to put some decent weight on it. But I'm squatting like I've never squatted before. He makes me go down really slow. And I don't get to sit at the bottom, and then I got to come back up, and he won't let me lock out at the top, and I've got to go right back down. And although technically I think I may have done probably 6 reps today.
Yeah, we don't even count, but yeah, you're good ballpark. Yeah.
It's really one long rep because I never get to stop. I never get to lock out. Deadlift, same thing. I've been deadlifting way more weight than I'm doing right now until I got sick. But what I was doing is I'd lift it, I'd lock out at the top, I'd put the weight down, and I do it again. What I'm doing now is from the time I pick that weight up until the time I put it down, I'm moving. And I'm under, how do you say it, Bill? Been under.
Okay, yeah, constant load, muscle load.
Constant under load. And it's so bloody slow. I want to hit him.
Yeah.
And all the exercises are like that. There's no stopping. If I was doing bench press, I guess, it'd be the same kind of thing. It just constant movement, never allowing gravity or the floor or my skeletal system to be in charge of controlling the weight.
He's learning, Phil.
It's my muscles are what's doing it. Shockingly, I can remember when my son started teaching me how to deadlift. My first big deadlift day, it really took it out of me. And I was just beat. I finished my workout and came and laid down on the couch and just passed out. But those were big, long workouts with heavy weights, you know? Almost every time after this 15-minute workout that Ben puts me under, I go and I collapse. We had a workout at 1 o'clock, 3 hours before this call today, and took a nap for about, I don't know, probably 20, 30 minutes, because it's so bloody taxing. It blows my mind. So that's it, folks. Maybe 5, 6, 7 reps, never stopping, never letting the weight rest anywhere. And I hate him. I hate him when he's doing this to me. It's really different from anything I've ever done.
Yeah.
So that's the how.
That's the how. And what's interesting, Phil, is that he's a hard worker. He's a driven guy. He's conscious of the nuance that I teach. Now, not everybody takes a nap after, but it is taxing. But the interesting thing is, the stronger you are, the harder this is to do. So for novices, for people, I'm training a guy in a little while that had a little bit of cerebral palsy. So he's got some limitations. Okay. He can work just as hard subjectively as Jack can, as my world record holder can, as my rehab patient can. It's subjectively just as taxing. They don't get the outcome. I don't have, like most of I have 80, 85-year-olds that do workouts. I'm going to have Jack over to watch them do it. But I mean, and they're fit and they weren't exceptional people or anything, some genetic freaks, but they do it to their capacity, their momentary subjective capacity. And that's the beauty of the system. We don't really count reps. What I use as my guidelines is some basic tenets of physiology. If I ask a muscle to work as hard as it can to recruit these glycolytic fight or flight, life and death fibers, we cannot sustain that for a very long period of time. We know that in the literature, and I know it in real life. Okay. So and the downside of high intensity exercise historically has always been heavy weights, explosive movements to move the heavy weights, very taxing, very stimulating, very damaging to your joints. Okay. So let's take that the hell out. Because when I first started training elite athletes, I didn't want to hurt them. Then they couldn't continue doing their sports training. Okay. So I figured out that if we reduced the force applied. Force is velocity times mass. And if you talk velocity, you're really talking speed, okay? You can't go from 0 to something without having some speed. And the faster you go from 0 to something, the more velocity, okay? But really, if I took the speed out of this thing, if I made the load constant so we wouldn't have this recovery, I could actually tax these muscles to muscle failure in a very short period of time, because that's their physiologically limitation. That's their genetic predisposition. I mean, if I ask you to sprint, you're not going a mile, okay? But you can literally do a wind sprint, think about it this way, with a different set of muscles in this training, okay? And get huge VO2, huge pulmonary response, much more so than conventional cardiovascular work. And I can also tax the aerobic system and the vascular system at a much higher level than I can by steady state exercise. There is no question about it. And the physiology is simple. I mean, we can produce an NO, a nitric oxide response, very quickly, very significantly, okay, at an accelerated and exaggerated level than we can doing conventional aerobic exercise. I mean,
convert that to English for the non-medical people. What is that?
So
what's that actually mean?
What it means that I can derive the benefits of what traditional exercise, which I call activity, okay, in a much more concise, actually a safer, mechanically and metabolically safer way than is conventionally thought. And Phil understands there is, whenever we do this stuff, we're trying to stimulate signals and pathways. Whether you eat a certain way, whether you take a pharmacological intervention, whether you exercise, move, diet, whatever, okay? And if you understand the pathways you are trying to instigate, and you understand that once you reach what we call a threshold to stimulate those pathways, which means what's the minimal dosage that's going to get me my response? Threshold I describe as putting a big rock at the end of a cliff, and once I push it over the edge of that cliff, I've reached threshold. I have irreversibly and irrevocably started an action. And so I try to reach that threshold, which it seems to accomplish, understanding the tenets of physiology. So how does our body work? Reach that threshold and then get out of Dodge, okay? Get the next muscle group doing it. So instead of conventional HIIT training, Phil, you understand, if I'm on a treadmill and I do interval training, it's very beneficial, and I run and then I walk and then I run and then I walk, okay, that's cool, okay? But that's supposed to be high intensity, and we know it's very beneficial, absolutely beneficial. So I say, I think you're missing a point here. This exercise after the fourth or fifth or sixth interval becomes very demanding, very taxing, very exhausting. But I don't think it's high intensity recruitment because you're not capable, okay? So just the fact that it's taxing, I actually think at the end of these circuit training things that they do, where they do 10 of a elliptical or treadmill or whatever, I actually think you're no longer capable of working hard. You're just beating the hell out of yourself. So I do all of my intervals with a new, fresh set of muscles, okay? Leg extension, leg curl, rowing machine, laterals, okay, with a fresh set of muscles capable locally of working hard because they're not taxed and exhausted from previous intervals, okay? And not only do I get this global response, at least the benefit of that same exercise being repeated 10 times, but I get local responses, which now become a whole nother realm of advantage for this kind of exercise. So I don't just get what we call the global advantages, I get local advantages enzymatically in the muscle, even vascularly. We know that if you work a muscle, your whole body benefits, but if that local muscle group is going to get specific benefits, okay, acute benefits, as opposed to chronic global benefits. And I hope I'm not getting too deep in the weeds, but exercise is capable of producing local benefits in my arm, but by doing that, I can make this bicep, and Jack can attest to it. It's a small muscle relatively, right? It's a small muscle. I can get enormous respiratory and cardiovascular response from doing that in the sequence that I have designed. And so what I'm trying to do is get all the benefits I can from exercise in a concise capsule, safely and productively, and for long-term adherence. I mean, that's the general objectives.
So it sounds like, when you're talking about the limitations of the muscle, right? Most people think of this as, to put it in practical terms, right? You're trying to set your PR at the bench press, right? And you're thinking that, okay, you've reached your muscle limit because you can't physically move any more weight through that movement.
Okay.
And it sounds like you're really talking about a different sort of physiologic limit of the muscle, in that, you're not at the limit of how much weight you can move with that muscle, but you're getting that muscle to the point that it literally can't do any more work after you're done with it.
Yeah, it can't do any more unimpeded work in good form. Once we start to struggle mechanically, that's when you come out of alignment. That's when you can get hurt. Okay, so we maintain a pretty strict form. We work muscles through a full range of motion, so we actually enhance flexibility. And then another thing, people say, you lift these weights, whatever. I mean, it's not lifting weights. We're using resistance. And by the way, right now, sitting here, we're all using resistance because there's gravity on this planet, okay? So everything we do is resistance training, all right? So I'm just applying resistance, I think, in a productive and safe manner, and I'm taking advantage of the knowledge of the physiology and the limitations, but I'm also taking advantage of the fact that the body adapts to something that it's not used to. And people say, gee, don't you change the exercises because people get used to it? I say, by definition, you never get used to failure. If you were used to it, you wouldn't fail. So something is novel in that particular exposure, right? Something is always novel at that moment. Now, it doesn't matter what the weight is, although if a weight is too light, we'll go on too long and then
Take too
we're
long
not going
to
to
fail.
we're going to fail in 4 minutes. And if it's too heavy, we're not going to be able to do 2 reps. But I mean, so we have guidelines that are physiologically dictated, scientifically dictated, but practically they can be accomplished by anybody at any level and even any kind of restriction. I mean,
So Ben, I'm thinking about this working to failure idea. I remember hearing this probably in junior high for the first time. Not that I had a clue what was going on. Not the 15-year-olds who were training me had a clue what they were talking about. But let me describe what I think you're saying and help me tell me if I'm getting there. So if I've got a weight, whatever it happens to be, and I can lift it once, I can get a full, good form lift in both directions under control. That's the minimum amount of weight I've got to have in order to get to failure. If I've got so much that I can't get a full rep, I've got too much weight. But any amount in between that minimum and that maximum, I can get to failure. It's just we're trying to get there as efficiently, as quickly as possible. Is that right?
As quickly as possible, but also there is a minimal and a maximal range. In other words, again, knowing the limitations of really it's the energy delivery. When we're demanding glycolytic energy at that level, okay, if we use the VO2 max model, which I'm not crazy about, we may be working at 400% VO2 max. Okay, 400% of it's 4 times as much oxygen as you can actually take in. That's how hard we're working. So that model really doesn't hold. Okay, because we're not using oxygen. We're using it in the beginning. And because we have different muscle fiber types that use different energy input and produce different metabolites or exhaust products, or sending signals, kind of enzymes and things like this, okay? Because we're doing that, we want to choose to fail in the physiological limitation of taxing those muscle fibers. If I did one maximal repetition, even in good form, and I failed, it would probably not be enough time under load to have this sequential failure, because, not to get again too deep in the weeds, but there are 4 basic muscle fiber types that I define that are all going to fail, okay? But under this load, they will fail in a certain amount of time if we work them better. In other words, if you do a marathon, some of these muscle fibers might fail, but they may fail in an hour. That's not going to stimulate the pathways. There's going to be too much inhibitory chemistry going on for muscle growth. Okay. And probably even too much negative cortisol and these kind of negative hormones to really magnify the cardiovascular, the cardiorespiratory. I mean, we're having inhibitions coming about. So I'm trying to have an uninhibited stimulation of all the muscle fiber types manifested in 35 to 90 seconds, which again, this is all physiology textbook stuff. It's not me, okay? And getting it done safely and to the point where we're going to stimulate these pathways of which I can elucidate. In other words, I can tell you what the pathways are, a lot of them, to give us the benefit that the muscle system talks to the brain about, talks to the endocrine system, talks to the heart about, talks to the vascular system. They have this crosstalk. It's now, this is a new term, kind of new, but whatever. And then the muscles crosstalk to all of these areas. In fact, the most recent one, this, Phil, you'd be interested in this. I just saw a study where there are 3 kind of pleasure satiety centers in the brain, all right? Different sections. And the muscles directly crosstalk to those and inhibit overeating, okay? Including a GLP sensitivity. This is something, okay, this is the physiology part of Dr. Ben, not the exercise part. I think, you know how we have insulin resistance? Too much insulin secretion, we get inured to it,
Right.
We don't respond. I think that people that are obese have GLP resistance. I think they produce just as much GLP, but they do not respond to it. That's what I think really goes on. So now, what is that? What's the
So the
consequence?
these GLP-1 agonists are having the same processing effect
As insulin.
as insulin.
Yeah, that's why I'm a little leery. Okay, now it may not be, it may, but I think there is, I think there's absolutely GLP resistance. Okay, because we know that obese people and lean people react differently to the same amount of GLP. So it's in the receptivity and then response to that impetus that there's a difference. Now, so I don't know that chronic exposure to more GLP will make you GLP resistant, meaning you need more and more of this. But you kind of figure that when you stop it, what happens, Phil, right? Fat cells fill up like a mother, right? So, right. I mean, and I'm not saying this is not something that can be used in an intelligent way for some subject. I think it may be lesser of evils for many people, okay? And I think there's a good use for that. But behaviorally, they got to do resistance training. They have to get their protein, and they have to learn while the brain isn't driving them the other way, how to eat kind of in a more healthy, organized way. And I think that may be how you could use the GLP. But metabolically, chemically, pathways-wise, I don't know. I think this should be a caveat. Just I may be wrong, but I think there's GLP resistance.
Wow.
This kind of brings up something I wanted to ask you earlier. You know, you talked about benefits of muscle building and you talked about benefits of fat loss and the balance between the two, right? Because one of the, I guess one of the issues that's been brought to the forefront with these GLP-1, medications is that people are losing weight, but they seem to be losing maybe a disproportionate amount of muscle. And therefore, in the end, not all weight loss is good weight loss, I guess, we're kind of coming to understand. And certainly we know about people that, might be lean, but they're sarcopenic. And that may be more of a concern than, let's say, someone who's overweight, but they're, adequately muscled. And so how do you think about this when someone comes to you and, they're talking about, I want to lose fat and I want to gain muscle, and what's the balance there? What do you think is more important? And how do you think they're independent of each other, or are they really, closely linked?
I think they're closely linked. I mean, I don't think they're independent. They may be different pathways, but I think the pathways can be inhibitory or excitatory. And then again, that's why I think I have a good system, because I think I can put these pathways together pretty consistently and in a healthy manner. But yeah, I mean, think about it. If you lose 40% lean tissue, okay, And some of this is how this stuff gets twisted. So they've had people on GLPs and they've lost 40% lean tissue, but yet when you measure their ability to produce force, muscle strength for their weight, they are not in a deficit. Some of them even improve, but that's deceptive. Okay, that's deceptive. So you're going to say this is good? No, because if you try to do a chin up and you're a wasted person and you're anorexic and you weigh 77 pounds and you can do a chin up for your weight, you're stronger than a very fit man at 160 pounds who can't do any. But we know you're more fit than that. I mean, no, I don't think so. So my point is, think about it really realistically. You're a 60-year-old person. You've had a weight problem for a long time. You lose a bunch of weight. You lose a lot of muscle. When you go off the drug or something happens where you're no longer maybe sensitive to the GLP, this resistance thing I'm talking about, what's going to happen? You're going to put on some weight. However, Phil, Jack, it's a hell of a lot easier to put on fat than muscle. Okay, what do you think's going to happen? You're going to become a fatter, maybe lighter than original person, but fatter. Okay, and then we know when you're quote fatter, then we're talking about what I'm really talking about is fat cells. This is an issue, the cell. Okay, and so what's the story on how are fat cells? How is the capacity of the fat cell? Okay, in an obese person, what's happening? Are those cells shrinking? Are they necrosing? Are they dying? Do we have fewer fat cells? That may be the case, but what we really want to be cognizant of is the activity of the muscle cell. And you're not going to get stronger and put on pounds and pounds of muscle, but you're going to be metabolically, quote, stronger, metabolically more active, metabolically more communicative benignly from the muscle signaling from an exercise muscle. Okay. But the fat cells also, what's happening to their signaling? Are they going to be, quote, hungry without the brain cognition of hunger and driving hunger when we stop this thing? Or do they just get, for the sake of survival, do they overcome the GLP inhibition? Okay, this is what we don't know. And I'm not trying to be negative because I'm not negative about GLPs in specifically. I'm just cautious about the use of them.
Yeah.
And I think we produce GLP on our own bodies. That it doesn't mean it's toxic or anything, but what's the yin and the yang? What's the threshold? What's good when what is too much and what is overwhelming? I don't know this, and I don't know who does know that, honestly.
When we're thinking about the muscle thresholds, right, these limitations that we were talking about, is that an issue of energy delivery, substrate delivery, or is that an issue of, I guess, toxins clear, the breakdown products, right? Being able to clear the breakdown products of processing the energy. What usually becomes the limiting factor?
That's a very good question. The debate that's been going on for 100 years is what causes a muscle to fail. Okay, is it synaptic? Is it is it electrical? Is it substrate? Is it buildup of inhibitory enzymes? And all of those things I think are involved. But I think what's important is that given the circumstances of this kind of exercise and the situation that I created in this formatting this thing, is that the muscles fail because given a healthy stimulation, okay, they fail because genetically, honestly, this combination of events inhibits their continuation. Maybe because if we would continue at that level, we would start to have I think you're probably going to have some central neurological inhibition and maybe negative consequences. Okay. In other words, when you really fail at a high level with this stuff, I think at some point your central nervous system says that's enough stimulation. So you got afferent and efferent, things going to your brain and things coming out of your brain, signals that kind of clash and say, you're done, baby. And that's maybe an oversimplification, but does that make any sense at all to you, Phil? I mean, I think that's what's going on. But the energy delivery, the substrate you use, the byproducts of fatigue, all of those things come into play in this milieu of energy utilization, digestion, wasting, absorption and storage. I mean, this whole field that we're in is all about energy, in my opinion. And what mechanisms can we use to be better at, healthier at, however you want to describe it, using energy, which means ingesting energy, digesting energy, using energy, wasting energy, and disposing of energy and storing it. Okay. All those things come in a big cycle that has a really subtly and nuanced balance that we call health. And so anything we can do to regulate those or to drive it back towards the healthy part of the fuel gauge as opposed to the illness part, I think is something we should consider. That's why I think when you don't consider this exercise that I prescribe, that you're missing the boat. I just think that's, this is a tool you should use, and it's very valuable and powerful.
Yeah,
One of the things
I was just going to say, ultimately, when we're improving, our cardiovascular system, right, that's all about being able to increase our delivery of these substrates around. And then when we're shifting perhaps from the sort of glucose-based metabolism to more of a ketogenic metabolism, we're providing more efficient substrate to our muscles or to our bodies in general. And then, we don't really think about the clearance part of it as much, but it's certainly an important factor. And, you've always kind of, at least the common maybe myth out there, but the common thinking out there is, right, you fail because you build up this lactic acid in your muscles and, that becomes overly inhibitory. And when you can't clear that is when we get to this muscle failure.
Yeah. Okay. That's part of the issue. But now we're finding out that lactate and lactate tolerance, lactate itself is a powerful fuel preferred by the brain over ketones. Okay. And it's a fast delivery system. So yes, what you're saying, Phil, yeah, there's a certain amount. Think of lactate as not being able to lift your head out of the water when you're swimming. Okay. It keeps your head in the water. You can't continue. Okay. Yes. Okay. But there's also something that can be derived. And again, that's a whole nother realm, I think, that I'm studying right now, is that I think lactate is a really important situation. Okay. And the lactate shuttle, there was a thing called a lactate shuttle, which distance runners thought they had, the hold on, and that was the only way you could do it. No, that's not the case. I mean, there are things like the Cori cycle, not to get again too deep in the weeds, that overcome that, the glycolytic demand, glycogen demand, sugar demand. And at the end of that, the recovery from that, the Cori cycle included, we now become as aerobic in the form of mitochondrial function as we ever will be. The most powerful aerobic, purely aerobic situation we can have metabolically is recovery from anaerobic, high intensity to failure metabolism. That's the closest you're going to get to a 0.7 respiratory quotient, which means almost purely fat burning. And that's another thing that most people just don't recognize and understand. But, that's literature, it's in the book, and I understand it. And I think that's another thing I'm getting into a lot, is I think we can direct mitochondrial adaptation specifically. We can direct it specifically by how we instigate this muscle fiber recruitment, how the level of exercise that we actually demand. For example, mitochondrial aggregation, or how mitochondria form, they move in a cell. Okay. The difference between type 1 oxidative fiber mitochondria and type 2b glycolytic mitochondrial fiber is they actually have a different aggregation and a different morphology. They are shaped differently. And I think a question is, and I don't know the answer and I don't know who does, is one configuration more healthy, quote, than the other? Is some combination or balance more healthy? But I know I can dictate that morphology and that adaptation through the way I manipulate the muscle fiber recruitment, the intensity of the exercise. That's pretty interesting.
So again, you're saying that the signaling is different, if you, and again, to use the practical example, if you exhaust the muscle with the 1 rep, high weight type approach versus exhausting the muscle with this sort of low and slow approach, that's going to have that different signaling down the line that's going to be affecting those mitochondria.
The mitochondria respond differently. They do. And I don't know which is more beneficial. If again, there's an ideal percentage of, yin and yang, that to me is starting to become real interesting stuff. Anyway, I mean, this is food for thought, if nothing else,
I have another question because this has been my experience now. I remember when I got started lifting seriously, the day after legs day was hell,
Yeah.
because of, I'm assuming, lactic acid. I feel like you've worked me as hard as I've ever worked. And the day after a workout, my muscles still are, I wouldn't say fatigued, but like when I stand up out of the chair, it's, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I had a workout yesterday. I've never had that horrendous, what I've always thought was lactic acid.
Yeah, it's not just lactic acid. In fact, there are so many enzymatic shifts and changes that happen. Lactate dehydrogenase, and there are different kinds of lactate dehydrogenase, and that as a direct result of producing lactic acid or lactate, that gets into the weeds a little bit, but it's not just lactic acid, not really. But understanding that the muscle is in it's in a mechanically compromised state, because there is some disruption, no question. In an acidic milieu, you're going to feel this kind of burning soreness stuff. But I really think there's no reason why we should get this muscle soreness. I think that's almost always from overuse, and it's almost always a tendinous thing, because most of your sensory receptors are in your tendons, not in the muscle bellies. So I think that's mechanical to a great extent.
I'll be darned. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. I mean, you can't believe how much money I paid this guy. I
mean,
Well, once again, what I'll say is we're coming up against time, and we've only scratched the surface. And so it means we'll certainly have to have Ben back for part 3 at some point. But before we go, certainly let people know where they can learn more. And if they want to experience the same epiphany that Jack has experienced, how they might be able to do that.
Like I said, I'm not trying to promote business. Jack knows that. I hide from people, but I do have a book, 15 Minutes to Fitness, which you can get on Amazon. That's $20. I explain this stuff, and I show pictures and things like that. And you can get a hold of me on drbenbow@hotmail.com. I try to answer all questions and return calls as much as I can. And if you don't hear from me within a few days, get a hold of me again, because I'm old and I don't remember everything. But no, I mean, and again, I think there's plenty of stuff out there on YouTube now to see what's going on. I can't take care of all the people. I do have other trainers that and I would like to actually, with you, Phil, with your whole program, see if we can get involved and get some people to be able to provide this thing, because I think it's got benefit. It benefits your program, and it'll benefit me in some way, just make me feel better. But anyway, yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm not pushing promoting this stuff. I keep studying it. I keep doing presentations. They're fun. I meet guys like Phil and Jack. I mean, for the audience, these are two great guys. I mean, I would hang around with these guys in college, and that's how I usually judge people that, we would have hung around in college and gotten into all kinds of trouble. But no, these people are doing good work. I mean, the program you have, Phil, and the people you have, I mean, I actually promote you, not necessarily for any reason other than the fact that you do good stuff. This is where people can go for good information, to guys like you, and there aren't that many around. And I like to hope that I give the same quality information when people ask me. That's the best I can do.
He is Dr. Ben Bocchcchio. drbenbow@hotmail.com is literally a great way to get a hold of him. That's how I did it. The name of this show is Stay Off My Operating Table. I got it right this time. Thanks for joining us. This has been Jack Heald and your host, Dr. Phil Ovadia. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.